I am so excited to be with you, Arlen and Keisha, to have a little chat. I feel like we should, I don't know, I only have water with me, but I feel like we
I have
should be
tea. I have tea in
tea.
my Black is Beautiful mug. So
I
I
also
am
have tea.
very excited to be here.
I'm very excited. So, so why don't we just take a quick second to introduce ourselves? You want to start, Keisha?
Sure.
Tell whoever's watching who you are.
Absolutely. So my name is Keisha Howell. I am a education entrepreneur. My business is called The Thought Partner, and I essentially work with district leaders and principals and school leaders in being able to take their vision into reality. I do a lot of work with supporting people in thinking through really complicated situations in their building. And I'm excited to be here with the two of you. I respect you in ways that are like significantly high. So I know that this conversation is going to be very dope, very enlightening, and I'm excited.
Yay! What about you, Arlen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Arlene Elizabeth Casimir, and there is a dog barking loudly that I hope doesn't interrupt us too much. Can you all hear it?
Just a
I
little
can
bit, but it's
a
fine.
little bit. It's just a
Okay,
little bit.
okay.
It's real life.
Okay.
Like this is
Yeah.
real life. This is what happens when you're
All
recording from
right.
your home.
There you go. It's so true. So, yes, as I was saying, I'm Marlene Elizabeth Casimir. I'm an educational consultant. I focus on content area literacy, social emotional learning, culturally relevant pedagogy, trauma informed teaching, healing centered education. And more recently, I became the head of teaching at the Collaborative for Spirituality and Education at Teachers College. So, I'm really, well, head of education. I'm really excited for that work. Just to think about, post traumatic growth and what comes after healing and how to live in a just thriving and sustainable fashion. So I'm really excited about that. And I love working with organizations and schools and foundations to do inner work for outer change.
That is awesome. And congratulations. I didn't know about that new position. That's really exciting. And I'm Colleen Cruz, friends with Arlen and Keisha. My current position is I'm the Director of Innovation for the Reading and Writing Project. I'm also a writer. My most recent book is behind me, Risk, Fail, Rise, a teacher's guide to learning from mistakes. I've also written The Unstoppable Writing Teacher, a YA novel called Border Crossing, and I mostly get to work with teachers and administrators in schools um, on lots of different things, literacy, issues around um, access to learning, thinking about students with IEPs, equity. So those are some of the topics that I'm interested and passionate about. And Arlen and I both live blocks from each other here in Brooklyn, and eventually we'll get Keisha to move here. Come on, Keisha.
I actually am moving next month. I haven't found an apartment yet, but I have been looking in Brooklyn. So that might be a possibility. Who knows?
Come on
Whatever
to
whatever
Brooklyn.
comes will come.
Yes, we've been waiting for you in Brooklyn, Keisha.
We're getting a little crew together. We've already got some people. Remember, we have a certain friend in common that was thinking about moving up to near where you were, but we swayed her. So, so I thought, um, I thought it would be interesting for us to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we often talk about when we talk together, which is like the hard stuff. People who know us know that none of us are really small talkers. We kind of go from
At
zero
all.
at
At
all.
all.
Hi, let's talk about the critical state of the economy. Yeah, it's not, we don't. So I'm not going to even pretend that we're going to do that today. So one of the things that I know is forefront of my mind as a parent of kids who are back in school here in New York City public schools, and as a longtime educator, I am seeing a lot of need amongst kids for ways that schools can respond to help them. Um, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and I feel like there's a way that we're just like trying to go back to normal, whatever that means. And I'm seeing it from both sides of it, like as both a parent and as an educator. And the thing that I'm sort of grappling with is, and I don't have an answer for this, so I'm sort of throwing it to you, is how how can educators respond in healthy and helpful ways to students who are coming back and it's not even whatever normal means,
Right.
but while they're also dealing with their own trauma, their own fears, their own anxiety and strife. What are the ways that educators can do that work?
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up, Colin, because something that I've been thinking a lot about with my dissertation research is like, what is the purpose of teaching and what is the purpose of school? And I find that it's so difficult for teachers to see the humanity of children and to fully comprehend the work that they have to do both within themselves and with their children to respond to this pandemic in equitable ways and ways that really pay attention to kids' emotional needs, because the entire function of schooling doesn't honor that work. And so I think before teachers can even start, not before, but while teachers are also thinking about how do I respond to children, how do I take care of myself and respond to my own needs, that there really has to be a conversation about schooling and learning and teaching as a whole. And that has to be a shift. The definition of schooling and teaching has to have a shift in a way that honors and centers, like schooling isn't just about test scores. It's not just about reading levels. It's about nurturing children. And if schooling is about nurturing children, then the work of supporting them and also nurturing teachers will be at the center. And so I find that with the schools that I'm working with, there's tension between, we have this assessment calendar that just came out, and it came out yesterday and we don't really know what to do with it, but it's getting in the way of the work that we want to do, versus teachers and school leaders being like, we know that children are hurting, we know that children need this space of safety, but we can't really provide it when there are all of these other mandates that are in the way. So when I think about like what has to shift and what has to change, I think of it more from um, not just a leadership perspective, but like a broad education field change that has to happen. Now, how that change happens, I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like that's the origin. Like that's the thing that has to shift. It happens both inside of the classroom, but definitely outside of the classroom as well. I know that that doesn't provide like a blueprint or an answer, but it is something that I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, because I definitely think that that notion, like, I know it's not alone in our city. We're talking a lot of talk about social emotional learning being the focus this year, but then they announced an additional assessment that is a standardized assessment that's 3 times a year. And it's not that those two things can't exist together. It's just, yeah, what is the blueprint for negotiating and prioritizing? Arlene, you have the answers, right?
That's so funny. What I do have is wisdom. I've been through something similar, like on a smaller scale in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. So it's sort of like I've seen some of this stuff happen. And what I've learned through that is how important it is to create experiences and professional development for teachers that really nurtures their inner core, their inner life, that really helps them to cultivate um, the ways that they stay grounded, because these are times where we are really uprooted and really uh, just distraught by all of the uncertainty that's plaguing us. And so, how do teachers find their center? And I think education has not been designed for people to go within and to find their center. And from that center, to operate from a place of personal integrity, to operate from a place that's aligned to their values. So, in my most recent experience, after like doing that sort of professional development with teachers in this particular context, I had, for example, a teacher write to me and say, like, thank you for the experience. And I thought that was interesting, her language. She didn't say thank you for the professional development. She said thank you for the experience, because I continue to emphasize that I would take them through an experience that I hope they could embody and think about how it felt for them and how they could then decide what kind of experience they want to design for their students. So in our follow up, she said to me, I would like to co-create a classroom where my kids feel loved, heard, challenged, supported, respected, valued, and seen. And what I like when I thought about those words that teacher shared, what was moving to me was, if we think about feedback, it's like, okay, that's how you felt, and you want to give that to your students now. And you're saying to me, in our next meeting, I invite you into my classroom to support me, to sit alongside me in a parallel process, and to help me to co-create this. Right? So I think about just how important the professional development is, and how important it is to not only develop people professionally, but to develop people personally. Like, how do we just standardize humanization, like it's one of those things where I don't think that should be the aspiration. I think that being able to invite people to be fully human, to show up fully in all spaces, and to think about how they could do that for their kids, and to also consider what the value of that kind of work is. What's the value in that, in children's success academically, socially, emotionally, mentally, all of the areas, is just really important.
Yeah. Go ahead, Colleen.
I was actually going to link it to you because I was thinking of a conversation you and I had. It's similar, and what you just said is so profound, Arlen. The idea of having somebody in your classroom, shoulder to shoulder with you, to support you in doing this work and to help you see things. And I remember a conversation that I had with you, Keisha, years ago. I don't even know if you remember it, but we were, I'm going to try not to curse, itching and moaning about the challenge of teachers who want to be anti-racist but can't always spot some of the practices that they have
Right.
that are at least rooted in white supremacy, right? And and I was like, how do we do PDs, we do workshops, we suggest reading, like but then they go back to their classroom and they're not able to see it. And you said they need coaching, they need somebody to sit next to them in the chair, and like, instead of focusing on something about the content that they're teaching, instead saying, today I'm going to be coaching you. I know one of your goals, and you also said that it has to be that the educator wants that. I can't just go in and do that work, but like, if somebody says, I really want eyes on my work, and then I can sit next to you and kind of whisper in, or like nudge you, or pass you notes when you're doing something. And it reminded me a little bit of you, Arlen. Like, I could imagine how powerful as an educator or as a parent, if I brought you into my living room or into my classroom, and I said, Arlen, can you just like watch me to see if I'm teaching in a way that's actually a trauma response, that's not a great thing, that's not helping my kids, or perhaps traumatizing them more. Were you thinking similar things, Keisha, about that coaching?
Yeah, I was, because I think, Arlen, what you are describing reminds me of my work as an education consultant, and how, if I am going into a school, it is my responsibility to say, how am I designing this professional development, this conversation, whatever it might be, not just in terms of like the content itself, but in the structure of the experience that teachers are having with me, and that principals are having with me. And one of the things that I wrote down in my notes is like, what are the conversations that I'm privileging over others when I'm working with principals? Like, when I'm talking to them, am I starting with like, how are you doing? What is going, like, what is it that I'm designing for them? And how can the design of that professional development, or even that relationship, be something that teachers and principals can experience? And how does that inform the way that they engage with the children that they're working with? And so something I'm thinking about is like, the way that I engage with principals has an impact on how they engage with teachers, which has an impact on how they engage with students. And just thinking about the trickle effect of the decisions that I make, One of the conversations that I just had with the principal last week, I asked them, I was like, what information do you feel like you need to have about your teachers that can make you the leader that they need you to be? And oftentimes it's like, what is their Danielson? What is their, like, what are they performing at? And it's like, there is information outside of that that I think, Arlen, you're naming, that gets to the core of who they are as a person and what they're experiencing during this pandemic, that is equally, if not and more important information than what's on their Danielson like review or whatever that thing might be. And so as I'm thinking about the question that you asked, Colleen, about how are we supporting teachers in this process and what is the work that teachers have to do to support students, it's making me think that it's not just about what teachers are doing, but it's about the experiences that teachers are having from consultants and principals and district leaders, and how that also informs for them what is worth or what is important in the classroom to be put at the center. But I do remember that conversation, Colleen, which is one of the reasons why I started the Thought Partner, because I was like, oh, people need a thought partner to say, I need help on this thing. Can you just sit with me and help me see this in a different particular way?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that conversation? I remember a lot of our conversations.
And I do think I love the idea of a thought partner. Well, I mean, I think any kind of professional development is when it's what you want to do, I think is really super valuable for people who can't get access to you or to Arlen sitting next to you. Like, are there ways for teachers or administrators to do this themselves? Like, is there, or bring in colleagues, or like, because I'm trying to think, I mean, in general kind of an awkward person. Like, I'm trying to imagine like walking up to a colleague and be like, so I think I'm traumatized and I think I might be traumatizing my students. Can you sit in my classroom? Like, how would that, can you tell me how I'm doing it? Like, because I've had colleagues when I was still at my own classroom come in to see if I had biases towards or against certain students. I've had people come in and watch the way I give feedback or confer or whatever. Like, how would you open that conversation? Like, how would you ask somebody to come in your classroom in that vulnerable way?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And what's coming to mind for me is that, for one, I think there are like a couple of questions folded into this. If teachers and schools don't have access to the kind of professional development experiences that we offer in person, I think what's beautiful about this pandemic, one of the gifts were the various ways that people could learn asynchronously or virtually, and ways that I've had like transformational coaching virtually. Never like sat with my coach in person, but my coach has impacted my life so much in how I show up fully with my values aligned to who I want to be in the world. And so when I think about what that could look like in education, let's say, for example, a teacher says to me, I'm trying to create community with my students. I'm not going to see you in person. However, I wanted you to know that here's my plan. And for this week, we'll focus on community only because community is so important. And next week, we'll start to include the literacy standards. So, as someone who recognizes the importance of integration and the importance of maintaining like academic outcomes with community, like you can actually create community and learn right about like content, then it's my job to say, let's look at this, or can I record a session and show you what it looks like to do all of this in 45 minutes, and perhaps to think about just a slice of what you want to do for community each day, so that it's not something you feel like you have to put like the academic learning on the back burner for. So I think there are ways to be coached virtually, asynchronously, that are incredibly valuable. It could be, hey, I recorded myself teaching. Can you take a look at it and tell me what you think? And you could even create coaching capacities within different relationships. So it might be the teacher down the hall who you ask to come over and look for certain lenses and things like that. And so when I think about how that relates to trauma, I think it's important, one, for educators to know what the different trauma responses are. Like, as someone who's been teaching about trauma informed learning for the past several years, it's so powerful and interesting to see how many people don't know how to recognize those responses within themselves and what they are. And then to have them know that everybody has mental health. Like, everyone's mental health is on a spectrum. And so to have the leadership know that there's a certain protocol for how to talk to educators about their mental health. Like, there are times where you're like, I think you need to go and see someone, or this sounds like a crisis. And there are times where, if we have a framework for student engagement, we should have a framework. We should have a portion of that framework be the impact of our mental health on others, you know? So if there's the way that that could sound is, if I'm having a vulnerable moment and you, Colleen, are my coach, I could say to you, Colleen, I am having a freeze trauma response. One of
Mm.
my students just said something incredibly egregious to the other, and I just froze for a moment and I didn't know how to respond. Like, I was stunned. It was so grotesque that I just didn't say anything. Could you help me to go back in there and think about how I could address that with my students? So, that is just a way to have a sort of framework for educators to be in communication with each other and with their leadership, to say, you know, what we know about trauma is you never respond how you think you will. So there's usually shock with how you respond. So that means that there's a lot of offstage work that has to be done and a lot of processing. So there needs to be a safe space to say, like, you know, I shut down. I became angry, and I'm not going to be penalized for it. That
Mm.
this was a human response that I had, and I made a mistake. Speaking of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that whole idea, though, like when you said I'm having a freeze trauma response, and like you just snapped it, like you were like, I did that work, like how, and you listed like you the you need to stop and you need to do that work first. You need to be able to identify your own trauma responses before you try to or maybe not even before, maybe it's parallel, but you do need to do that work if you're going to respond to students. But then you also named, but it's got to be okay to do that, like it's
Right.
got to be okay to name that you're having these reactions, because I feel like so much of the way schools tend to go
Mhm.
is we just like guideline it, guidebook it, or rule it to death. So it's like we don't raise voices at children, as opposed to what is it that's like, is that a trauma response of why teachers might be raising their voices, or we don't, I don't know, we don't ignore da da da.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of trauma responses
It's
that we
like
try
it's
to
the
ignore.
zero tolerance vibe, but it's like,
Yes.
and that to me is very much like my way or the highway, but it doesn't actually pay attention to like, why is this thing happening and how do we respond to why it's happening? And I think that schools are not safe spaces for teachers to make mistakes. And as a result, their ability to do what Arlen is describing, of saying, like, I am having this reaction. Can you help me? It's like, I am having this reaction, and according to our school policies, I am in the wrong. And so, therefore, I can't. I'm embarrassed to say it to someone. And so I withhold it, and then it festers. And then as a result, it never actually gets dealt with. And so I do think that there is as Arlen is describing, like there's a importance in being able to say, like, in our school, when these things happen, here are some outlets or some spaces where you can go and be vulnerable and name, like, this is what I did and I know that it wasn't acceptable, but here is how I would like to grow from it. And I don't see that there are spaces for growth for teachers or students, because I think that the same thing happens with kids. I lash out at someone, I'm not in a space where I could say, I did this thing. I recognize that it wasn't okay. Can you help me? It's like you get sent to the dean's office or you get in trouble. And that essentially is the end of it.
Yeah,
I
for many, that whole idea of like, in for many kids, to deny you did it or to defend is going to get you less consequence than
Right.
to say I did this thing and it was messed up. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think, Colleen, to your question about like if you don't have access to Arlen or Colleen or a thought partner, I think that kids are the best thought partners in the world. Because I found when I was teaching, I would tell kids like, hey, I need to work on this thing. Can you help me? And kids love calling stuff out. They love being like, that thing you just did right there, that was racist. You need to fix it. And so I feel like for teachers who might not necessarily have, the community in their building, turning to their kids is a really beautiful way of one, showing kids that like I am in a space of growth, just like you were in a space of growth. And I am working on this thing. And I guarantee you, children will be there to challenge you, but also like celebrate you in your growth. And they are going to be the ones who will call you out on all of the things. Like when I was teaching second grade, there were times where I would not look at the clock and I would forget that we needed to be at PE. And so I told my kids like, hey, can y'all tell me when it's such and such? And they loved it. They were like, you're 5 minutes behind. I'm like, all right, like, thank you very much. So I think that kids are the best thought partners. Like they come with no filter sometimes. And so their ability to be very direct and honest with you, I think is like top tier thought partnership. So for teachers who are watching this who are like, I don't necessarily have that space in my building, your kids are going to be the strongest thought partners that you have.
And it's such a gift too when we invite them in, like that they were also modeling for them that this really is a learning community and that none of us are above learning. And like I think there's a lot of talk about like growth mindset and how we want kids to take risks, but they never really see us take risks, and they never see what happens when failure happens, that's not their failure or
Yeah.
something that they're at risk of doing. So like if I were to say to kids, like I'm trying to, respond well to conflict, I think it can make, can you keep an eye on that? And that, granted, that requires a certain level of support
Mm-hmm.
from administration and a certain kind of relationship that you have with your kids. But yeah, I think that's a really great, I might not necessarily say watch for my trauma responses to
Mm-hmm.
7 year olds, but there are things that we could certainly talk about together.
Yeah. Like I think
Yeah.
about
Oh,
I'm sorry, Arlen.
oh, I was just going to say, interestingly enough, the way that I did this work with my second graders, where we talked about our pain bodies. And so we talked about when our pain bodies were activated. So it was so powerful to hear kids say things like, I'm in pain, and to have that metaphor of when someone's in pain, that could show up in many different ways. So that could show up in how we speak to another person and how we engage with another person in ways that we sort of retreat and are non responsive to people. And so finding some sort of common metaphor or thread or word that could help students to engage in a shared pool of meaning and discourse with you about trauma responses. Like there are ways to share this with students in age appropriate ways and to help them to express it, because once you share that intentional lexicon with kids, then you start to see what's living and breathing, what's happening, and how it's evolving over time.
Yeah. Like I think about when I was teaching fifth grade in Harlem, my school had a system where if a kid wanted to communicate with a teacher but they felt uncomfortable, they could write a note. The note was sent to the principal and the principal gave it to the teacher. And I remember that I got a note that one of the kids in my class told me that I owed them an apology. And I was like, excuse me? Like, what? And when I went to talk to him, he was like, yes, you did this thing yesterday. It hurt my feelings. And I think you should apologize to me. And it was in that moment where I was like, wow, like not only did that kid like advocate for themselves, but they called me out on something that I did do to them. And I did need to apologize to them. So I don't know. Like, I agree with you, Colleen. I don't think I would be like, watch out for how I traumatized you. But I might say, like, you can call me, like, I am working on apologizing more. When you feel like I owe you an apology, please let me know. And I think to your point, Arlen, like in having children see the teacher being like, I'm working on this thing. I'm working on not raising my voice as often. I'm working on apologizing, and inviting children to be able to be a part of that process, not necessarily to call you out like, ooh, you didn't apologize, but it's more so of like, here's this thing that you did. I would love for you to apologize to me. And me and that kid after that had a really beautiful relationship because the level of respect was different. I think like at that time it was very much like, I'm the teacher, I don't apologize to kids, but it was like, actually you do apologize to kids, and you owe that child an apology and change behavior after. And it really shifted the way that I invited kids to be a part of my learning journey, because I saw them as capable of being able to be um not necessarily experts, but to be knowledgeable about that. I don't know if as teachers we always see kids as like they are knowledgeable and capable of being a part of your growth. And they are actually the most important part of your growth. And so I think that is a moment in my teaching where I was like, a kid definitely calls me in because he did it with love. He was like, I respect you, but you also owe me an apology. And that really shifted my perspective of who I was and how kids could be a part of my journey and growth, as both a teacher and a learner.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on this with like the letter system, which at first I was like, what is that? But then I was like, it was a system. And I feel like with all of the decisions that educators make, there's a lot of systems that exist in our schools anyway, but like if we were more mindful of creating systems that encourage this sort of thing, so we could sort of set it and forget it, like, okay, this is the way, this is one method for communicating with your teacher, this is one. Um and I was thinking about a system that I started developing right before the pandemic. Like every time I taught a lesson, I would ask kids to rate it and give me like, did that lesson work for you, not. And I just systematized it. It was just every time I walked into a classroom I would ask kids to do that. And over time kids started to, like, if I forgot to do it, they would be like, hey, this was a 4 or whatever. But like I learned so much from that. Like I learned so much about feedback, about how I felt when I was criticized.
Right.
How but the more it was systematized, the more valuable that it felt like. And I was thinking about like, you know, maybe doing an audit of our systems that we have in place, and like what systems are traumatic and what systems could we perhaps adjust, revise, or add
Right.
to make this more automated. Or is that too simplified? I'm just thinking of like systems I know that are traumatizing for kids, like dress codes and homework policies where you miss recess and things like that. Like, I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think that all systems in schools are they are teachers in their own right. They teach kids, they teach teachers and kids and everyone in the building behaviors. They teach them what's valuable. They teach them all of the things. So I think about when I was a teacher, even though I definitely decided like who I wanted to confer with, my kids also could sign up for conferences. And one of the things that I noticed is that it taught them to initiate help. It taught them to say, I actually need help in this moment. And up until then, teachers had been deciding who needed help. But them signing up, it was literally like a piece of chart paper in front of the room. By them going there, they were like, no, I am self initiating help, which then is like allowing them to have agency over their learning, and agency over like, no, I need you in this moment. And that really shifted the dynamic in the building. So I love systems. I think that systems are sometimes haphazard and not intentional. And I think if we ask ourselves, like, what are we teaching children to do through these systems? I think they would be way more thoughtful.
Yeah, it also makes me think about the importance of inviting students to co create systems. So, like, for example, I will never forget there was a child I was teaching to read aloud who was having a trauma response on the carpet. And as this child was having the trauma response on the carpet, I started to have a trauma response. And I was just like, not today. Not another day of this. And in that moment, I remember a child looking at me and she said, Miss Casimir, I'll take care of it. And I was just like, you're a first grader. I don't know how you're going to take care of it. And she invited this child over and she said, come sit with me over there. And
Mhm.
she sat with them like on our little like couch area and said, what's happening to you? Like, did you eat last night? Did you
Mhm.
get enough sleep? Are you okay? You're really hurting all of us because you're in pain.
Mhm.
And in that moment, like I started to call we created a whole protocol and it was called like Oprah's couch
Mhm.
because
Oh,
this
I love
child could
that.
have, yeah, she could bring any child who was having a difficult time and they would leave like and come back refreshed to the rug, and I started to wonder like what's happening over there. Like, and I went over and actually listened and I saw she was asking them what they ate, if they
Yeah.
went to bed on time, is everything okay at home. And I was just like, where did this child learn how to do this, and why didn't I think about this as the teacher first? And I realized it was because I was having a trauma response. I don't want to know how your night was last night. I just want you to behave on this rug like everybody else, you
Mhm.
know? And I had to sit with that's how I was feeling. And from that moment, like so many other children wanted to like follow the Oprah's protocol, but they weren't all qualified, you know? Some people were using it in a very manipulative way, like, you know? So it started to make me realize that certain children were more inclined to hold space for others, like natural space holders and natural healers. And it made me wonder, where in the classroom is the space for these kinds of children where they could say, like, wait, I have a protocol that I want to put into place. I feel like I could support you in helping this friend who is experiencing trauma, and let's see how this friend responds. And I don't think that we allow kids, like in that moment I just was trying to maintain my composure, and through that decision, that deliberate decision, like maintain your composure and continue to teach as if this isn't happening, something magical happened
Right.
by
Right.
me just nodding my head and saying, go for it.
Yeah.
Let's see if you can help.
Yeah.
And so I think when we get to those moments where we could surrender, because that was a moment of surrender, like to allow another child to intervene in a way that, of course, I kept my eyes closely on. Of course, I was like listening with one ear, as we do as teachers, and like having my eyes on the rest of the children. But I started to notice this child just let go and go, I feel so safe with her and I'm ready to come back. Like she literally set the little like hourglass timer and said, by the time this timer is done, you're gonna be back on the rug and ready to learn.
Mm.
And I was just like, whoa. So I think, how do we invite? That's one example of one system that emerged from students. But I think there are many opportunities for systems to emerge that are created by students that we could support, that we could help them flesh out, that we could write the protocol and steps for so it could be replicated over time. And we don't take enough opportunities to do that.
No, and I think teachers have to decenter themselves as the decision maker in the classroom in order for that to happen. Like there's a lot of, you named it, surrender, relinquishing of control, our perception of kids' abilities to say like, actually no, you have the ability to comfort and support your classmates. You have the ability to come up with systems and they're brilliant. And I don't think I think sometimes as teachers, we see ourselves as the capital T answer, like the answer to all things, but we really have to check our egos and say there's so much like brilliance in this space and it's not just coming from me, and I need to create the opportunities for children to say, here's how I think we should actually handle this. That's a beautiful story, Arlen.
It really is. And it like right now I'm like holding on to two things. Like I'm sort of imagining this, but I'm holding on to the one thing that you said, Keisha, is systems are teachers.
Mhm.
And that this, when you see a system, when you experience a system, to stop and think, what is it teaching me? And I was just thinking about it in the world, in in the pandemic, in walking down the streets of New York, like all these systems that are in play. What is the system teaching me about our values, about our priorities, about. But then the second thing is this thing that you said, Arlen, is that so much of teaching when you're traumatized and your students are traumatized is about making it stop. Just making it stop, like stopping the merry-go-round. And like I think that notion of having the wherewithal to say, in order to make it stop, I need to make a system to make it stop. Like and like the Oprah couch is hysterical and awesome, and is also teaching kids some things about what you value, and also teaching you about the systems that you need. But how, like just brass tacks, like in the moment a kid is having a meltdown, having some sort of trauma response that's triggering you or pushing your buttons or however we want to call it, and you realize you're not in a good space, and you didn't set up the system before it happened, but you're in the moment now. Like, what? And we don't all have those awesome first graders sitting in our classrooms who are like healers. What is a teacher to do? Because I have a feeling like, well, it's going to step up, right? Because maybe we didn't do the groundwork to make space for this kid to feel like they could stand up. Um, what what is sort of the break glass a case of emergency? Because I have a feeling, well, no, I know because I've talked to a lot of teachers. This is happening all over right
Yep.
now. Like, it's happening in the moment. It's probably happening right as we're talking. It's happening.
Yep.
What is a teacher to do when they're in that moment? A kid is having a trauma response and they are having a trauma response and they haven't set their system up. And it's okay to say you don't know, but I'm curious.
I can tell you what I do. What I like, I know for me, like when I feel myself rising and I feel myself like bubbling over, I'm like, can we just pause? Like, I know for me, especially in this pandemic, I've been watching how I respond to like when I notice myself getting in a particular place. And I just like everything pauses. Let's turn the lights down off low. Let's turn some music on and let's just all reset. Because I know that if I keep going, it's not going to be great. So I'm a pauser whenever there's like so much happening and I feel myself about to like lose it. I'm like, all right, let's just all take a break. And even when I was in the classroom, I'm like, can we just please take a break? Because the thing is, what's happening right now is not as important. Like this math lesson can wait till tomorrow. This read aloud can wait till tomorrow. I'd rather us just like put the brakes on, everybody just chill out for a minute. And then once I feel myself getting calm and I'm like, everybody needs to chill out. That's me. I'm a pauser.
Yeah, I would add to that. Like, I feel like what Keisha's describing as a pausa is the ability to self regulate, and to come back to a space of just calm. I feel like my strategy when this actually happened to me several times teaching in New Orleans would be to ask for help. So I had a teacher across the hall, a teacher like right next door, and I would ask for help. Like, can we just switch for a second? Like, I'll come to your room. Like, we all had our lessons at the door, but I do think there's like groundwork to be done where you share and rely on community, and I had to let go of shame. Like, I had to know that there were certain things in my own life from my own childhood that if they resurfaced would, and if they resurfaced from another child's actions, that would activate a trauma response within me. And so knowing that that's what's going to like inevitably happen, being able to say like I just need to step out for a second. And it's sort of like with parenting where your parents are like, okay, or when the village is raising a child, it's like, go, sit with your auntie for a
Right.
moment, or your auntie's gonna come in. I'll be right back. And your auntie's like gonna come in. But it's like, what are the conditions for that? Like, one, you have to build community. One, you have to like, two, you have to be in dialogue with your community to say, like, I'm still, because we're all still discovering our triggers. How many of us here, like Keisha, Colleen, haven't you discovered some activations that happened to you in this pandemic?
Oh
Just
yeah.
like,
Yeah. Which is why I think systems, I think you can set up all the systems in the world at the beginning of the school year, but the real systems come when stuff hits the fan and you're like,
Yeah.
oh wait, I don't have a system for that. Let me think about that a little bit. So I think, Arlen, when you said releasing shame, I think it's really important for us as educators to know that I cannot have all the answers. And then there are things that you didn't even know were a trigger that will trigger you. And I think if you move with that, being like, you know what, I might be triggered today. I need to be on the lookout for it. I need to be mindful of it. Like, to me, that's really, really important. Because the thing is, I don't think systems are anything that we can anticipate. Like we can anticipate as much as we want to, but something's going to happen in the classroom where you were like, did not expect that to happen. Now I need to respond to it. What
And
do I
you
do?
Yeah.
you're
And so
naming
just
them of like vulnerability, right? Like knowing when I didn't sleep well, I'm feeling stressed, I'm hungry. My principal made an offhand comment to me that I'm feeling really vulnerable right now, and that we should just know when we're a little bit more fragile. And so, in addition to knowing our regular triggers, knowing when it's like walking on a floor that's recently been washed, like today's teaching, I need to be on the lookout that
Yeah.
despite my systems,
Yeah.
it may not.
No, the
Yeah.
systems might not work today, and that's okay.
Mhm.
So I know we have to wrap up, and I want to talk to you all day long and get everything that you know. But I'd love to do like a speed round because there's so many things you both mentioned. And I know that the people who are watching this are probably a little bit like us in that they like follow up. So if people heard some of the things that you were saying about systems or trauma or coaching or any of those kinds of things, what would you recommend would be follow-up work, whether it's reading or videos or people to listen to or learn from, or what would you recommend, sort of like your top three things you would recommend?
One, I would say talk to kids more. I think that all of the things that we discuss, kids are knowledgeable about, they're aware of. And so I think when it comes to like systems and triggers and things of that nature, those are conversations that we can have with kids. I can ask children like, what do you notice gets you mad often? What do you notice gets Miss Keisha mad often? Like those are all things that I can ask kids. So if I had to name like one follow up that I feel like every teacher could do today as they're watching this is go talk to your kids. They are a wealth of knowledge, and we have to treat them and respect them and honor them for the wisdom that they hold within themselves. That would be one thing that I would name as like an immediate thing. I think from an admin perspective and from a teacher perspective is to look at your systems and say the question that we brought up earlier, like, what is it teaching kids? I think all of us could look at, certain systems that exist in schools already and name what it teaches kids about themselves, about their abilities. And there are things that can be changed today immediately. Even if the system has to stay, the way that we engage with the system could possibly be different. And I think the last thing I would say is like do some self study, notice yourself, study yourself, notice when you get triggered, try out some different ways to respond to that. And also recognize that as much as we want to be the experts in the building and in the room, there's so much knowledge that happens, and it's important to be in community with other people who can be a part of that journey with you. So those would be my top three.
I love that.
Mhm. For me, my top three would be number one, think about your vision for recovery, like your 20, 30-year vision for yourself as well as for your students. Like, what do you want to be true about your teaching in the pandemic? And share that vision with your students and also learn theirs. I think that that's so important. And I hope that all teachers want to support themselves and their students to reaching the most authentic expression of themselves in the world. And so I think a text that could really help to do that is All About Love by Bell Hooks, because she talks about loveless systems and how these loveless systems have like even infiltrated education and as a result have made us completely forget about the humanity of our students. And I just think that's a powerful text to be grounded in, like, nurturing our students development and seeing beyond their trauma, to know that they are not their trauma and we are not our trauma, and we have a vision for recovery. And I think the third thing that I would recommend is Equity Centered Trauma Informed Teaching by Alex Chevron Vinay. It's a great book for leaders, for educators, for teachers to really think about ways to put this work into practice in equitable ways. And there are so many different anecdotes and strategies and things of that nature, like in that text. So those would be the three things that I recommend.
Love that. And you already recommended a couple of the books that I was going to suggest. The only thing I think I would say that I would add to that is, and it's all built off of things that you both have said, is giving ourselves a grace as we're walking through this time, and like the way that we give our bodies physical grace. Like if I, fall and twist something the rest of the day, I'm kind of like tender on that ankle, and I give myself a little space. That all of us are walking around teaching on a twisted ankle, but it's trauma. And that the same way that I would like stop and rest and put my foot up and understand that I'm not going to run any marathons for a little while, that like the way we teach and the way we are in our day-to-day life, we should be sort of treating ourselves tenderly, and treating those around us tenderly. I think that and then that idea of a person, I don't want to like a thought partner or just pick a person, and maybe they're in your building. It'd be great if they were across the hall or next door, but it could be a text friend or a Marco Polo friend or a Flipgrid friend, or even a Twitter friend, that like you have somebody and you just say like, I'm working on making it through this year and healing from the things that have been happening and helping support my students through this as well. Would you like to be my thought partner or my collaborator? And somebody that you can be honest and vulnerable with, I think feels, if you don't feel comfortable telling them about the mistakes that you make on a daily basis, they're not the one. So yeah.
Say that one more time, Colleen. Say that one more time for the people in the back.
If you are not comfortable telling them about the mistakes you make on a daily basis, they are not the one.
They're not
it. You have to be like, yep, I left my lunch on my counter and I forgot to feed my dog and I totally mispronounced a kid's name. And like, if you don't feel like you can do that, then they're not the one.
That's it.
No.
No. And I hope that just one last thing, I hope that they could also, I feel like your text, Risk, Rise, Fail, is just a great text to learn how to put grace into action. Because I think grace is one of those things that people are like, how do you develop around that? How do you teach that? And your book is so helpful to support people with that.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up, but thank you so much. I really wish we're going to have to hang out again soon.
Yeah.